This is Dr. Karen, and you are listening to the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network, where I share up-to-date, evidence-based practices, my own experiences, and guest interviews designed to help pediatric therapists, educators, and aspiring school leaders design services that support social, emotional, and academic growth and set kids up for success in adulthood. Whether you want to learn effective strategies for your therapy session or classroom, be an influential leader on your team, or find creative ways to use your skills to advance in your career, I've got you covered.
Hey everybody, it's Dr. Karen, and welcome to episode 232 of the De Facto Leaders Podcast on the B Podcast Network. In this episode, I'm sharing a clip and sharing a couple takeaways I got from my interview with Jill Fahy in episode 122 titled Executive Functioning for College Students Beyond Checklists and Planners. Jill Fahy is actually one of the first people that I started learning from about executive functioning. She's got some great articles, and she also has some presentations on speechpathology.com. And I know that she has done speaking engagements all over for the duration of her career over the last 20 years. And we get into some great conversations in our interview. So what I'm going to do in this episode and some upcoming episodes is reflect on some great insights I've gotten from interviews with my guests and share some clips from those interviews, because in a lot of my conversations, we cover a lot of topics. Sometimes the title of the episode or the show notes don't fully convey all the things that we've gotten into. So that's why I'm featuring some of the past interviews that have made a big impact on the way that I think. So in this episode, Jill and I talk a lot about executive functioning. So there's some conversations around definitions of executive functioning. We also talk about some of the challenges that she sees. She works at Eastern Illinois University and supports students who are in college. And so we talk a lot about what she's seeing as far as what needs they have, things that probably should have been done before kids get to college, and as well as setting appropriate expectations and helping kids understand their needs, especially being able to set boundaries and expectations with what kind of supports adults should be giving kids, both leading up to college as well as when they're actually in college, so that we can actually foster their independence and prepare them for life beyond school, life beyond college especially. And we also share our thoughts on how we convey to the public what executive functioning is. And then as professionals, what can we be doing? We talk specifically about speech language pathologists because we are both SLPs, but figuring out not only how we convey to the public what executive functioning is, how to effectively address it in students, as well as what specific professionals can do to make sure that kids develop these skills. So I'll start with my three key takeaways. So my three takeaways that I wanted to cover are, number one, executive functioning is complicated. Number two, there is a debate among professionals who work on both language and executive functioning, myself included. There seems to be a bit of a debate on what should we work on when, which one is more important, what should SLPs and other disciplines be working on, what do you have to work on first, all of those things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my insights on that topic, and then also just some insights on how do we prepare professionals? How should professional development be structured so that the professionals supporting kids have the tools that they need, as well as the systems in place to make sure that they can use the information and expertise that they have. So let's get started with the first one. So I will, in just a couple minutes, share the a clip from the interview. But first, I will share my takeaways, and then I'll let you listen to a portion of the interview that I thought was really interesting and, like I said, changed the way that I think about things. So let's talk about the first thing about executive functioning just being complicated. So I like to share this a lot. I've probably shared it in multiple podcast episodes up until this point in multiple conversations. But I wanted to emphasize this point. So this past spring, as I'm recording this episode, I spoke at a conference in Illinois, and the target audience was mostly special education professionals, a lot of teachers, a lot of related services disciplines, administrators, and I was asked to come do 3 different sessions for the day on executive functioning. Um, in this session, the presenters or the conference organizers actually had to give me a bigger room because a lot of people signed up for my sessions. My thoughts are that it wasn't because I was the one speaking. I know some people know who I am, but I think that mostly people signed up for my sessions because I was talking about executive functioning. And this topic is really blowing up, especially with the neurodiversity movement and all the things that are going on in education and healthcare right now. So I'm pretty sure it was the topic and not me that drew people in. But when I was done speaking at the end of the day, there was a panel of all the speakers who participated in the event, or at least a handful of speakers. And they there were some audience members, they were sharing their questions, and one of the questions was something surrounding curriculum. There was a lot of talk about the science of learning and some key concepts that need to be in the curriculum when it comes to universal design, because that's obviously something that's really important for special education. You've probably heard the statement, you can't fix a tier 3 problem. You can't fix a tier 1 problem with tier 3, meaning that we can't just put the onus all on special education to address the issues that are going on in the schools right now. A lot of these interventions and supports need to be front loaded into the curriculum so that we can support students who are in special education, but most of all, really ensure which students need to have special education and which students might be able to be supported by simply putting a more robust curriculum in place. So anyways, one of the presenters, when we were talking about curriculum, was venting her frustration with how little attention math curriculum has gotten. I have in recent years made it a point to make sure that I have gotten some experts on this show to talk about math, because there is a lot of emphasis right now on the science of reading, which is great because we've had so many reading curriculums that have gotten traction that aren't evidence-based. And I think that the math curriculum experts are really wanting there to be more research and support for math curriculum. But this particular person was venting her frustration about how a lot of the emphasis on math curriculum is really about executive functioning, not math, which I thought was really interesting. And I agreed with her concern, even as the person who was in the conference talking about executive functioning all day, talking about how it's important to layer into all parts of the curriculum. But I think it's really important to understand that working on executive functioning is not a panacea. It's not a magic fix. If you have students who need math skills, you still need to make sure that you have a robust math curriculum. We still need to do skill building activities. Being able to problem solve and teach problem solving skills with no context or specific skills to attach them to is not going to get them anywhere. So like this particular math curriculum expert said, we can't expect work on executive functioning to improve math skills if we aren't also teaching math skills. So we need to, especially if we have people who are supposed to be working on math or working on reading or working on the content areas, or if you are a speech language pathologist or a reading specialist, be working on reading and language skills in addition to executive functioning. Executive functioning is so complex and abstract that people won't even know what you're talking about if you don't think about a specific content area or a specific activity or thing that they're trying to accomplish in life, and then layer executive functioning skills onto that. So, if we have somebody who's a math expert, we have to talk about those math skill building activities, the direct instruction that needs to happen in order for students to learn math. And yes, that does mean some repetition. And I would say the same thing about reading and some of those other areas. It's different if you have parents that you're working with. We don't necessarily need to get as in the weeds with some of those academic skills because those are the things that schools are working on. With parents, we do need to be more functional and talk about how executive functioning is going to impact trying to get out the door in the morning or basic chores or day-to-day activities or kids' ability to navigate social situations, which of course some of those things are happening in the schools as well. So that's my first takeaway from the conversation. And in the beginning of the clip, Jill and I talk about how a lot of things that are pseudoscience, not evidence-based, when it comes to things like ADHD, executive functioning, a lot of times they gain traction because they either sound like a simple answer, like changing your diet and it's going to fix your attention issues or something like that, or supplements, or even some of these things that have gained traction in the parenting movement, like like just talk to your kid about their feelings and it's going to improve their executive functioning skills, which of course, if kids need a space to talk about things, we want to provide that. But if we're not providing specific skill-based instruction on both the content areas, the specific skills, and weaving executive functioning in, it's not going to improve all of the skills. I I think that both of us agreed in this conversation that there is no simple answer. We're both not exactly sure about the best solution. But the thing that I am trying to do right now in order to solve this complex problem is introducing the concept of stacking rather than swinging. The people who are skeptical of the science of reading, I think it's part of that skepticism is because there are still some legitimate debates going on with even what is evidence-based. And I think that the when new research comes out and we learn new information, it's not necessarily about completely debunking something or swinging in a completely opposite direction. What it is, it's about stacking and taking what information we know and layering on top of that. And I think that in our practice, when we're thinking about building our own skills and figuring out how do we address the content areas and executive functioning, and how do we prepare professionals, we do want to embrace this concept of stacking and layering rather than swinging, rather than complete overhauls of initiatives in short periods of time, because that's what's going to result in sustainable change in practice. And that's what's going to reduce the skepticism from the public when it appears like we're swinging in one direction and then we're doing a complete 180 and going in the other direction. So that's number one is it's complicated. And my next thing that I wanted to talk about is this contest or this chicken or egg debate between things like, I would say, skills and executive functioning, or content area and executive functioning, but how it presents in my discipline specifically is language and executive functioning. So which is more important to work on, language or executive functioning? If you're a speech language pathologist, for example, which is what Jill and I talk about in our conversation, how do you figure out how to work on language and executive functioning? Can you just work on executive functioning? Can you just work on language? What does this look like? So again, it's complicated, but that's why this concept of stacking, what I specifically refer to in my School of Clinical Leadership program, is this concept of asset stacking. So let me talk about the challenge first. I have seen, and I'm probably guilty of this myself, as whatever your area of expertise is. I think that it's easy to think our thing or our area is the most important area that everyone should care about. But obviously, that can result in a lot of confirmation bias. All of us are guilty of it. So, for example, I have a suite of programs and a signature program that is designed to help speech pathologists create a system for language therapy. That's my Language Therapy Advanced Foundations program. In the free webinar, where I talk about the rationale behind the framework that I teach, I talk a lot about how many times when speech pathologists come to me and they have students who have those comprehension, inferencing, again, things that involve a lot of executive functioning skills, when they're struggling on those comprehension skills, the tendency is for them to want to work on more high level comprehension type skills. The challenge with that becomes is that students need underlying language skills in order to have that high level problem solving. They need the syntactic and vocabulary and semantic reasoning skills in order to support the complex language that would result in the self-talk that would enable complex planning and reasoning and all of the great executive functioning skills that we would want students to have. So, on one hand, you could easily make the case that if students do not have those underlying language skills to support executive functioning, then you are going to hit a wall if you are only working on executive functioning, which I have seen happen again and again in a lot of the clinicians that I support. I saw it in my own practice. Jill and I discuss it in our interview. And then also there is research to support the importance of building those language skills, especially if you have kids who have the developmental language disorder profile. So that is why in many of my pieces of content, I make the case that if you are a speech pathologist or someone supporting language, it makes sense for you to prioritize first and foremost building those language skills, especially if you have students who are not making progress with some of those high level skills. Because many times, if we are only doing high level, we aren't giving those skills that are going to give students something to problem solve with. That is why there is this bidirectional relationship between language and executive functioning. The challenge becomes, when do we have time to work on executive functioning, and when do professionals even have the time to figure out how to be proficient in both areas? That's why stacking is important. So what this is that you are focusing on one thing at a time, both building your own skills, both putting systems in place in practice, and this can be one individual clinician or teacher or administrator and their team, putting one thing in place at once, knowing that you might not be optimal in other areas. And with this strategy and with doing these strategic things that people can be consistent with over time, you actually get your results faster than trying to do a complete overhaul and teaching people too many habits and giving them too much information at once and not getting consistent implementation, continuing to have these big pendulum swings and change in initiative and then another change in initiative. Doing this stacked layered approach where you focus on building one system at a time actually gets your results faster, and you just need to think about what your primary discipline is, and that can help you to prioritize. So for speech pathologists, for example, that's why I make the recommendation that they should focus on those underlying language skills first, with the mindset of figuring out opportunities how to weave a lot of executive functioning into their language therapy framework, but really making language, vocabulary, and those underlying language skills their primary focus. But after they get proficient in that first thing, after they've learned a skill, they've created one layer, then they can stack another thing on top of it. So, for example, if I use the math example, let's say that you have a group of math teachers and they need support in math curriculum and best practices. I would not start with those professionals and do a deep dive on executive functioning. I might weave it in and give them some information, but first and foremost, they should, like the speaker in the panel that I was on, they should be first and foremost making sure that the math curriculum experts know how to teach math. And then once we've created that layer, then we can stack something else on top of it. Then we can come back and stack executive functioning on top of it, because then they'll know what to do with it. Then they'll have some of that basic foundational knowledge in their discipline, just like an SLP doing language therapy would, to be able to create an additional layer and think about executive functioning. And this, of course, means that we are thinking about different ways we can consult and collaborate and building other systems. You can stack those things as well. So we're building clinical practice, we're putting different things in place from a programming standpoint, and we're doing it strategically over time. If we think about this from a standpoint, which I think is what Jill and I were grappling with in the interview, how does a speech pathologist who has 30 to 40 minutes a week of students figure out how to work on language and executive functioning if they just have 30 to 40 minutes a week in a direct intervention session? Well, if you are only thinking about direct intervention and trying to fit all of that into one model of service delivery, you probably can't do either one very well. But if you focus on strategically layering and building the professional skills one at a time, so making sure that they have a solid handle on language therapy, so that they can build those language skills that would be supporting executive functioning, that can be a place that you start. And then we can think about building proficiency in executive functioning and building proficiency in other service delivery models. So, for example, not just thinking about what you would do if you have a group of students in front of you and you are teaching a lesson, whether it be small group, one-on-one, or a classroom, but then we can also figure out best practices for executive functioning, deepen people's knowledge, and then also figure out how they can come up with different systems for collaborating and using other ways to weave things in. So this concept of asset stacking and just stacking and layering so that we can figure out how to communicate the right information to the right professionals, and then also do it in a way that enables them to have consistent implementation with the new skills that they are learning, as opposed to trying to do too much at once. That is what I show you how to do in the School of Clinical Leadership, my program that helps school leaders put executive functioning support in place in their building, on their team, or in their organization. So it was designed specifically for people in a leadership position or in a position where they're working directly with students, such as those direct related service providers. It could even be appropriate for teachers. So it's designed to teach you the strategies that you can do directly with students to support executive functioning, to figure out how to stack and layer different strategies, and then also to figure out how to make those programming and practice changes as well once you get some of those initial layers in place. And then for my other program, Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, that is a program that specifically is designed to help speech pathologists or other professionals working on language to create a system for language therapy. So essentially, you can use the programs together depending on your needs. In Language Therapy Advanced Foundations, you can build an asset of which is your language therapy protocol. You can build that and put that into your asset stack. So the asset being your protocols. So you can start that stacking concept, and then when you're ready, and when you feel like you have a handle on language, then you can start layering in the executive functioning, which again is what I teach in the School of Clinical Leadership, where I give you some additional protocols for addressing executive functioning that you can do directly with students. But also I talk about the strategic planning of, how do we start layering some of those other service delivery models in? And by service delivery models, I mean coaching and consulting with other professionals. So doing some teacher coaching and instructional coaching, parent coaching. How do we figure out how to get these strategies embedded across the day? So again, it's not possible. Executive functioning, just teaching certain strategies is not going to be a panacea if we don't have those systems in place. And it's not going to work if we don't make sure that the professionals have those other underlying skills in their content areas and disciplines so that they can implement both of them at the same time. So I help you navigate all that in the School of Clinical Leadership. And you can do this even if you aren't in an administrative role, but obviously you can also do it if you are an administrator. So I will hop over to the interview clip with Jill Fahy right now, but also if you are interested in taking a look at the Language Therapy Advanced Foundations program, if you want to start building some of those assets, to start building that language therapy system, I can help you do that in that program. Just go to drkarenspeech.com/language therapy. And if you want to start doing the same thing, so learning those executive functioning strategies, starting to work with your team and figure out a strategic plan for yourself in your own practice, as well as how you can start impacting your team, then I invite you to check out the School of Clinical Leadership, which you can do at drkarendudek-brannan.com/clinical leadership. Now, please enjoy this interview clip with Jill Fahy, and also be sure to check the show notes for the link to the full interview in episode 222. It's so challenging when it comes to educating the public and getting the information into the right people, because I have delved into this from different angles. I've done adjunct assignments and considered, do I want to be in the academic field? Do I want to be in the public schools having an impact on leadership? And then with the business, it's the marketing side of you have, for example, a Facebook ad and you have a short headline. How do you get someone's attention and communicate that to them when it's all of these different levels of complexity? And I will tell you, the people who work in marketing that coach people like me to try to get my information into the hands of other people, want you to oversimplify it, because which one is a sexier answer? Here's this one thing that's going to make this big impact over here, which, yes, sometimes if there is one thing that is the thing that you need to work on right now, that can be the thing that gets you moving in the right direction. But you can't communicate nuance in a Facebook ad or an Instagram post or a Twitter feed or whatever. And that's how a lot of the work and information is being disseminated. And that's why a lot of families are being pulled in by these, take this supplement and cure your ADHD or whatever, because it sounds so much easier than the real answer.
It sounds so much easier than the real answer. And parents and educators, parents especially, are desperate for a tangible answer they can lock onto and employ. It makes you feel as though you're doing something productive. It gives you a sense of movement forward. So it's a terribly difficult question for how to educate the public. I've lectured all over the country for the last, maybe 20 years, trying to find a simple and easy way to explain what are executive functions, what is their normal realm of development, and which of those may or may not relate to language if I'm speaking with a group of speech pathologists. What about reasoning? The reality is, one needs to understand multiple processes of cognition: attention, processing speed, working memory, language processing, social cognition, self-appraisal and regulation, the emotional processing systems of the brain, complex reasoning, verbal reasoning, nonverbal reasoning. One really also should understand the components of memory, how we retain, store, organize, and retrieve information. And never mind all of the different executive functions, how we inhibit or delay, how we strategize and prioritize, how we initiate and persist to overcome fatigue or boredom or cognitive disarray. How do we engage flexibility and adaptability? How do we pull all of those things together is like a tangled mess. And we're really talking about the same brain, whether it's the brain of the adult that somebody in the medical world in our field might be working with in a brain injury unit, or, the developmental differences in a brain of somebody we might be seeing in a school or private practice. It's the same brain. And I think when we think about it from a neurological perspective, it jolts us into a different way of thinking. I guess to simplify some of my professional goals, I've wanted to make an impact so that educators, parents, professionals that we work with differentiate between the student they might inadvertently think of as just being lazy, not trying very hard, just not motivated, just don't care. There's a difference between the brain that is unable to regulate, unable to initiate, unable to predict, reason, compare, versus somebody who genuinely doesn't care and doesn't want to. In my experience, most students really would like to be successful. They would like to earn verbal praise. They would like to have good grades. They would like to feel like they're capable and can be independent, So what can we do to understand where the breakdown is? I spent a long time trying to focus then on how does language impact our ability to plan ahead. And really my thinking on that now is the complex language, specifically complex syntax, allows us to express relationships between ideas. Which in turn allows us to look at causation and implication and condition. And that allows us to predict outcomes. And if you can predict an outcome or consequence, then you can begin to be strategic in your planfulness. And you can't do any of that unless you have a really well-formed semantic network of ways to depict conditions or to differentiate between possibilities. And so I'm really thinking a lot lately and worried about, from a speech pathology perspective, I'm worried about the impact we are currently able to make upon adolescent language development.
Yeah.
From there, I'm really worried about how, in general, how any of us has time, never mind that. How do we have time to dive into the world of executive function therapy? We don't yet really have a lot of great evidence-based practice, truly. Much of what has trickled down was originated in the world of brain injury literature.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what does it look like for the developing brain? And that question is different depending upon your underlying problem. And what is your executive function profile? There is no one good answer. And so when people want the simple explanation, and I land on the example of planners because it's a pet peeve of mine.
Yep.
I knew
we'd get into this.
We will get, yes. And so, every IEP or 504 plan that we see here in our program for students who are applying to our program, there's the dutiful, listing of the student will use their planner. Using a planner sounds so obvious. It's a relief. Everybody feels like, okay, this will be great. In my experience, it takes about 2 years of deliberate, intensive work for a student to be somewhat proficient in actively using a planner. Planners are so much more than copying down words from the board or writing a due date in it. Planners are an external representation of complex reasoning, predictive reasoning, very complex language, the ability to formulate and paraphrase, temporal ordering, comparison, the ability to prioritize, but also the ability to update that and reevaluate it every day. It's a landing pad for the assimilation of information from the instructor, the syllabus, the assignment sheet, the slides, the lecture, the emails. It's like an amalgam of multiple things. And using a planner does not happen overnight, and it's not magic. And so, that's just one example of this, the quick soundbite, the sexy representation of what you need to do to fix all of the problems.
Yeah.
And I don't have a good answer for how to educate the general public differently or to help our colleagues help us and help the students. I don't have a quick, simple answer.
Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to check the show notes for all the places you can go to connect with our amazing guest. And also be sure to check the show notes for more information about the School Leader's Guide to Executive Functioning Support, a 7-day course that shows school leaders how to get started with their executive functioning implementation plan. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/school leaders. I created the School Leader's Guide to Executive Functioning Support because educators have to be everything to everyone in current times. There always seems to be a new initiative, and it can be really difficult for teams to implement yet another standalone program. But the great news about executive functioning support is that it doesn't require complicated materials. It can be seamlessly layered onto existing practices and amplify the effort that you put into content area curriculum. And most importantly, executive functioning support can help you to differentiate instruction for those students who need support in special education as well as general education. It can be a really powerful universal design initiative that ensures you're meeting students where they're at. To learn more about the program, you can go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/school leaders. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to leave me a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcasts, and share this episode with anyone you think would benefit from the information. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.